Welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. The House Intelligence Committee just finished a closed-door hearing on Russian collusion. Today's testimony featured behind closed doors. Michael Caputo, one of the president's campaign aides. Caputo spoke to the press after coming out of the briefing.
Do whatever it takes to help them clear up this Russian collusion delusion.
Michael Caputo will join us in just a few minutes for a debrief on what he saw in the Congress today. But first, Attorney General Jeff Sessions gave a speech this week to a group of Christian lawyers, a group called the Alliance Defending Freedom, the ADF. It concerns itself mostly with protecting religious liberty, and that's pretty much what the Attorney General talked about when he spoke to them. But that is not at all what the press reported. Here's the headline from ABC News. Quote, Jeff Sessions addresses anti-LGBT hate group. Over at NBC News, there was this. Jeff Sessions tells hate group DOJ will issue religious freedom guidance. You would have thought it was a cross burning, which of course was the entire point of those headlines, to give you the impression that it was. In fact, the Alliance Defending Freedom takes positions that are not so very different from the ones Barack Obama ran on in 2008, or that Bill and Hillary Clinton publicly espoused throughout the 1990s. How did this get branded a hate group? Well, by the Southern Poverty Law Center, of course, a totally discredited but extremely rich left-wing organization that for decades has tried to shut down legitimate debate by labeling ideas it disagrees with as hate speech. Among the organizations it has designated a hate group, the American College of Pediatricians, hardly the Klan. But thanks to the Southern Poverty Law Center, they are now in the same category as the Klan in many news stories. Deeply dishonest and unfair, but there's a bigger point. At stake here is one of the most basic questions of all. Who decides what we get to talk about? What should you be allowed to say in public? What should your kids be allowed to learn in school? Which ideas are legitimate and which ideas are so dangerous we must suppress them? Well, NBC News and the Southern Poverty Law Center think they're in charge of that decision. We disagree, which is why we're pleased tonight to be joined by someone who was actually at the Jeff Sessions speech, Kristen Waggoner. She's vice president of Alliance Defending Freedom. Kristen, thanks a lot for coming on tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You all argue cases pretty routinely before the Supreme Court. As a hate group, how do you get inside the Supreme Court?
Well, we're not a hate group, because what we do know is that Americans deserve to have ethically sound reporting, and what they got from ABC and NBC is journalistic malpractice. Alliance Defending Freedom has actually won 7 cases in the last 7 years before the Supreme Court, and none of it had to do with any LGBT issues. In fact, we won a case just 2 weeks ago involving the right of a church preschool to be treated equally by the state. And we've litigated more cases than any other organization protecting the rights of free speech on campus for students. In fact, over 400 legal victories have been chalked up by us. So I think the real question is, why is ABC and NBC willing to promote propaganda and cut and paste the Southern Poverty Law Center press release into its story when the left and the right have discredited this other organization?
Calling you a hate group for having basically the same position Barack Obama had when he ran for re-election in 2012, which not 1912, 2012, and you're a hate group for having a position similar to that. Did you complain to ABC and NBC over this?
Yes, we are complaining, and fortunately there are others complaining on our behalf too. We've demanded an apology and a retraction of the story. Again, it's nothing more than propaganda, and it's concerning that they would use Southern Poverty Law Center as a source when they have already said that they will attack anyone that opposes their leftist ideology. I don't know if you know this, Tucker, but they've actually opposed and put on their list veterans. They put on their list Catholics, Muslims who oppose terrorism, and even nuns have made this list. They're about shutting down debate and making millions in a direct mail marketing scam.
Well, they certainly are, and they have been for decades and decades. What's surprising, though, is after all the stories, the exposés that have run on the Southern Poverty Law Center, Politico just had one, I wrote one 20 years ago, there's really no question what it is. It's a scam. But they are taken seriously by purportedly serious news organizations still. Why is that?
Well, I think, again, it's because Americans are losing trust in the media just for this very reason. The SPLC has said they're about attacking enemies and shutting down free speech for those that don't agree with them. So again, it underscores the fact that these networks would use this as a source instead of using sources that the federal government has said are reliable and that the right and the left rely on.
Well, how about
it does
telling
bring
us
up
what people believe? I mean, here's what I object to is the name calling. So obviously the reporters who wrote these stories disagree with your views. Fine. But why not just explain what your views are and allow readers to come to their own conclusions rather than dismissing you or likening you to the Klan, of all things?
Exactly. I mean, if you look at our record speaks for itself. We've played a role in 52 Supreme Court victories over the course of our ministry, and we have a case pending right now, and we just won one. And these cases are not focused on anything other than protecting the rights of all Americans, no matter what their faith is, no matter what their walk of life is, all Americans to speak freely and live consistent with their convictions. And that includes people that are with the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Exactly. I guess, I mean, it's one thing if someone disagree with you, but to be called a member of a hate group is not something I'd want on my Wikipedia page, as ludicrous as it might be. No, I wouldn't want that. I don't think most people would want that. You know, your neighbors look it up and you're part of a hate group. I mean, there's a cost to that, a personal cost to that, isn't there?
There is a cost to it, and that's why we're fighting back. In that, you know, we want to make sure that we're engaging in civil discourse and not stooping to the level of SPLC with name calling. But again, we would challenge the media and anyone else to look at the record of these organizations. We're about representing people of all walks of life. We're a well-respected advocacy organization before the United States Supreme Court, and they are about putting millions of dollars in an offshore account and attacking anyone that doesn't agree with their leftist ideology.
Right.
It's wrong, it's un-American and unconstitutional.
But the fact that NBC is uncritically repeating their propaganda is just absolutely shameful, and I hope they're ashamed of this. Kristen, thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Well, as of tonight, we're bringing you an update on the Russia story. Official Washington still consumed by the supposed hacking of our election, a charge often repeated, rarely explained. That's the same election, by the way, that brought many of them to Washington. Today, the hysteria continued, indeed accelerated. Watch this.
The attack on the integrity of our elections, the security of our country. The integrity of our democracy is at stake.
Thank you, Leader Pelosi, for organizing all of us today who have taken some action in dealing with the Trump family criminal enterprise. Unveil the criminal activity, the unconstitutional activity of this president and his family. So I have dubbed them the criminal Klan a long time ago.
I think what we're learning with the Trump Jr. meeting is when you meet with any Russians, you're meeting with Russian intelligence and therefore President Putin.
When you meet with any Russians, you're meeting with President Putin. That's the level of debate in Washington. Michael Caputo got hauled before a congressional committee today. He advised Trump during the presidential campaign. He was at a closed-door House hearing not long ago, and he joins us now with an update. Michael Caputo, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker. Listen, before we start, I want to congratulate you on the success of your show, and I've always admired your affinity for the Grateful Dead. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, thank you. Look, there's a lot I don't know about this story, and I'm sincere in wanting to learn more. So what did you learn in the event you went to today, the closed-door session?
And this is a fishing expedition.
Okay.
They told us 2 hours. We went 3.5 hours. They repeated questions 2 and 3 times. They asked me about the same people 2 and 3 times. They were looking at each other with quizzical looks on their face. They don't know where they're going with this.
So what kind of questions did you get asked?
Well, I mean, did you know this person? Did you ever spend time with Jared Kushner? Did you ever, et cetera, all the different things that you would expect. And they couldn't hear no enough times. The fact of the matter is, I lived in Russia 25 years ago, and they're trying to ask me questions about 1994. If that's not a fishing expedition, I really don't know what it is.
So your wife got brought into this.
Yeah, Jackie Speer, the congresswoman from, and I use that term loosely, from California, mentioned my wife in the midst of a live hearing on the air, in front of millions of people. I was out of town on business. We started getting buried in threats.
What does your wife have to do with that?
Nothing. My wife, by the way, ironically, became a citizen not 1 month before, and within a month she was already being accused of being a traitor. Jackie Spear really
On what grounds was your wife accused of
She
being a
was
traitor?
born in Ukraine. Which, of course, as you and I both know, if you're born in Ukraine, that doesn't make you a fan of Russia. Jackie Spear just doesn't know her facts or has really bad interns in her office. But I want an apology from Jackie
Because
Spear.
there's like a Cyrillic alphabet, therefore you're working for Putin?
Oh,
I thought most Ukrainians hate Putin.
They do, of course. I mean, there's a difficulty going on between the two countries right now. But if you drink vodka, you have Russian dressing in your refrigerator, you're game for these people.
So what happened when she mentioned your wife?
Well, we started getting terrible threats. In fact, I was out of town on business. I got a call on my phone from somebody who said they were Antifa, and they said, "We know you're out of town. We're going to burn your house down with your wife and children in it." And, you know, things have changed for my family dramatically, even though I left the Trump campaign on June 2nd. And even though I've never heard anyone, least of all Donald Trump, even say the word Russia during the entire time I was on that campaign. This is a fishing expedition. It's clearly designed to delay and stop the Donald Trump agenda.
So what role do you think Russia did play, just as a citizen, in the 2016 election?
Well, you know, I believe that WikiLeaks, I've always believed that WikiLeaks has had some connection to Russia. It's not clear if they did this time. We didn't even get a chance to look at the server. The DNC wouldn't even give the server to the FBI or Homeland Security. I've always thought that they were probably getting their materials in the past from Russia. But as a matter of fact, it doesn't take collusion from the Trump campaign for Russian active measures to mess with our elections. Listen, we messed with elections. The funny thing is, I was sent in 1994 to Russia by the Clinton administration to get involved in their elections.
Seeking what outcome?
The re-election of Boris Yeltsin.
Yeah, how'd that work for Russia, by the way, the re-election of Boris Yeltsin?
Yeah, it wasn't all that great. When I met Yeltsin, he was a lion, but by the end of it, he was a souse.
Yeah, a drunk for sure. So, but you think it's likely that the Russian government was involved in the hacking of the DNC?
I think it's likely that the Russian government and its active measures were trying to get involved in the American elections because they get involved in all elections of all major nations, just like we do. We may not hack. We may. I don't know. But I can tell you as a fact, as someone who was sent to Russia to get involved in their elections, all the major opposition parties in Russia were concerned about my work there and said I had to stop meddling in their elections. That irony is not lost on me.
You were sent by the U.S. government?
By the Clinton administration. To get involved. I worked for the Central Election Commission there, trying to steer their election law, and afterwards trying to help candidates.
Do you think that the Russian government preferred candidate Trump over candidate Hillary?
No, I know they didn't. I mean, first of all, I've been told many times over by people I know from Russia and in Russia that Hillary was their candidate. And the reason why is they didn't like her. She was a problem for them, but she's predictable, totally predictable. Donald Trump, they thought maybe he was a better guy, but he was totally unpredictable. And it's a Russian standard that you go with predictable every single time.
Of course, it's absolutely a wise standard.
And you know that they were going to defeat her on every front because they did it for 8 years of Obama.
So your contention, you don't sound like much of a Putin fan.
Well, you know, I got to tell you this. Donald Trump wants to have better relations with all nations. He wants to have better relations with Russia. I'm not a big fan of Putin. I've criticized him in the past. In the pages of the Washington Post after my friend was murdered in 2004 on the streets of Russia, on the streets of Moscow. But Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have an opportunity to change the way that we interact together. And we're ruining it with this bogus Russia investigation.
So your friend was murdered, you believe, by the Russians. Putin had a hand in it. You're mad about it. How did you respond then when you saw a sitting member of Congress, Jackie Spear of California, refer to you as Putin's image consultant?
I know that's something. First, I don't think Putin had anything to do with my friend's murder. I think the society there was responsible for it, and it was Putin's responsibility to stand up for media freedom. That was my point in 2004. But when she called me Putin's image consultant, it was very clear to me that she has terrible interns. She didn't do any searching. All she had to do was look what I've said in the media, what I've said in the press. I don't make it my business to insult Vladimir Putin or anybody else around the world. But my position on Russia and on the Kremlin is very clear. All you had to do was research it. Instead, she went after me and my wife on live television, and we've been enduring death threats and other threats ever since. That's March 20th.
Really quick, I just want to flesh that out just for 1 second. What was the basis for that charge, that you're Putin's image? Do you know why she said that?
Sound bites. She was trying to get on television. It was very clear. It was a very important, very rare public hearing.
You've never done his hair and makeup ever?
No, I've not. I've done his manicure, of course, you know. And, of course, somebody's got to wax his chest, right, when he rides the horse. Listen,
now you're getting dirty, Michael.
I know Jackie Spear does not deserve to be in Congress if she doesn't come back and apologize to my wife for what she did. She can say whatever she wants about me, Putin's image consultant, Maxine Waters, Mani-Pedi guy, but as far as I'm concerned, you bring in family members, you bring in my wife, who became a citizen less than a month before. She owes us an apology.
Especially as a Ukrainian. It's bizarre. Michael Caputo, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot,
I appreciate it. As you know, many on the left don't like the police. Will this surge in anti-police violence tone down the rhetoric from the left? Probably not. In a minute, we're joined by a writer from Salon.com who's written on this subject. Also, who do you think is more inclusive, more open-minded, atheists or religious people? That answer straight ahead. Well, the recent surge in anti-police rhetoric has been matched, maybe not surprisingly, with a corresponding surge in anti-police violence. That includes the recent death of NYPD officer Myosotis Famia, who was assassinated in a patrol car last week in the Bronx. None of it has been enough to mute liberals, some of whom at Salon.com, days after the shooting, ran a piece entitled, "America is Suffering from a Plague of Deadly and Unaccountable Racist Police Violence." The author of that piece, Celisa Kalakal, joins us tonight. Celisa, thanks for coming on.
Hi, Tucker. Thanks for having me.
So I guess I have a more nuanced view of this. I think that there is behavior by police, as there is by every sector of society, that's impossible to excuse and that should be cracked down on. I guess what I disapproved of in your piece was the generalizations that you made, that police as a group are racist and violent, and I wonder how you reached that conclusion.
Well, in my piece, I never actually said that police are racist. What I talk about is police violence and the rate of police officers who kill civilians in recent years. If you look at the numbers, in 2015 and 2016, over 1,000 people have been shot and killed by police officers. Those numbers don't lie, and this year, over 500 people so far have been killed by police. So what I'm talking about is police violence that kills a lot of people, and a lot of those people are unarmed or they don't to officers, and those are alarmingly high numbers. So in my piece, I never say that police are racist, but they can get violent very quickly, as we've seen in a lot of...
Right. I mean, I don't want to I don't want to contradict you because you seem sincere, but I don't know if you can see, we've got the headline of your piece up on the screen right next to you. It says, and I'm quoting, "America is suffering from a plague of deadly, unaccountable, and racist police violence." A plague of it. That seems like a generalization. Now, I would agree with you completely. Any shooting is too many shootings, but this is complicated stuff. And so to dismiss it, as your piece did, as racist without proving that seemed unfair and not really like journalism.
Well, if you look at the demographics of the people that are killed by police, disproportionately a number of them are black and brown people. Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. And in a lot of cases, 69% of black people that are shot and killed by police are actually unarmed, or they didn't pose a violent threat. So in my piece, I show that police violence disproportionately affects black and brown communities, more so than other communities. So
okay, well, but they're also much higher. I mean, this is again a complex matter, and there are much higher crime rates in those communities for, who knows why, but there are, and so that may be a factor in this. But here are some numbers that I think show just how complicated this is. So there was a study a couple of years ago of about 2,700 police shootings between 2013 and 2015, and I'm quoting now, found that the odds of a black suspect being killed by a black officer were consistently greater than the odds of a black suspect being killed by a white officer. That doesn't prove anything necessarily, but it does maybe show that racism isn't as simple in this context as you're making it sound. If a black suspect's more likely to be shot by a black cop, then what does that tell us about racism?
Well, I think what it tells us is we have to look at the system and not the individual police officers that are killing these people. Systematically, the way police officers are trained, they're taught to go for violence first. In a lot of states, they don't tell police officers to resort to other means to subdue a subject other than shooting and killing them. So
okay, but hold on. But right, there are 2 different things. Whether non-lethal force ought to be used first is a valid question. But I want to get to the question of race. So and I'm quoting, white officers statistically less likely than black officers to kill black suspects. So if all cops are being taught to be racist, why are black cops more likely to shoot black suspects? It doesn't really make much sense, does it?
No, you're looking at it individually when it needs to be looked at as a systemic. No, it's supposed to be. You have to look at it in a systemic way where you look at the system that allows these police officers to commit these acts of violence, and then they don't get held accountable for it. We've seen time and again police officers getting off on killing another person. Geronimo Yanez, who was shot and killed, Philando Castillo, he was acquitted of all charges.
I mean, again, I don't want to be mean, but you're maybe dodging the point a little bit. I think some of the issues that you're raising are valid issues. I don't want anybody to commit brutality against anybody else, and I mean it. Mm-hmm. But to charge that racism is at the core of this without any evidence, because you actually don't have any evidence at all, and there's some countervailing evidence, makes people more fearful, makes them hate each other, makes our society way less happy and less trusting. And so it's a big deal to charge something like that. And don't you think you should pull back until you can prove it? I guess that's my point.
Well, I do think I do prove it in my piece, because if you look at the statistics and you look at the data, police violence disproportionately affects black and brown bodies, and it always has. Throughout history.
Why are black cops more likely to shoot black suspects than white cops are? How does that fit into your neat little racism package? I don't get that. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, as police officers, they're part of the police system in this country, that no matter what race you are, you still are taught the same tactics.
But why are they more likely? I mean, it doesn't, look, again, I just want you to open your mind a little bit. This isn't college. And just look at the facts and then draw your conclusions from those. And sometimes, you reach a point where you're like, I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but it's not as simple as my professors told me it was. That's all I'm hoping that you'll conclude.
Okay, well, I think you're missing a point a little bit about what I was trying to get at in my article, and about the seriousness of police violence and why we need to address it in a meaningful way.
Okay. Well, I'm with you in some ways on that. The race stuff is wrong. So, Lisa, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Atheists have long believed in their own open-mindedness. You might call it an article of faith. But are they actually tolerant? This question has been studied, and we've got the results next. Well, they take away small-town park benches with religious quotes on them. They sue schools for Bible studies for elementary students. They want God and trust taken off the currency. Amazingly, though, atheists believe, in general, they are more tolerant than you are. That's according to new research. It shows that atheists think of themselves as open-minded and inclusive. The reality, according to the study, they are actually less tolerant than religious people. Amy Peikoff is a feminist and an atheist who disagrees with the study's conclusion. She joins us now. Amy, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker. I'm glad to be here.
So, are you allowed to disagree with a study? I mean, this is science. So don't you have to kind of nod and accept
certainly
it?
I'm allowed to disagree if I think that the fundamental approach is flawed. And I think there's one question that can show you what's wrong with the fundamental approach to this study, and it's this. Are you closed-minded if you refuse to seriously entertain or to spread fake news? And by that I mean a media-driven narrative for which nobody has provided any evidence. I would say no, and yet the notion of closed-mindedness at the foundation of this study is essentially the same as that.
Interesting. Shut out a little bit. How do you think this study is flawed on its most basic level?
So one of the things that the study classifies as closed-mindedness is a reluctance to come up with arguments against your particular position.
Right.
They ask you to take a position on 3 different questions. They're really kind of odd questions. It has to do with whether you think homes should be painted a light color, whether you think that it benefits society to have homosexuals, adopt children, and the third one was think that the meaning of life is a personal question. So, a bunch of random questions. But they ask you, take a position, and then they say, come up with a bunch of arguments against the position that you took. And then they say that they want you to tell them whether they find that persuasive, whether you find that persuasive. So in order to be not closed-minded, according to this study, you have to come up with a bunch of arguments against your view, and you need to say that you find those arguments persuasive. It's not a situation in which you're presented for evidence against your view and you've refused to consider that evidence and then therefore you're closed-minded.
No, but
it's asking you to come up with the arguments.
Well, thank you for explaining that. That's really interesting, and I actually think the study's more valid than I did before. Because that really is the acid test. Can you put, it's really a measure of empathy. Can you put yourself in the position of someone who disagrees with you, and can you mount a valid or a reasonable argument against yourself and see its strengths? And if you can't do that, the question is why? And that is because you can't imagine that decent people disagree with you.
In the study, Tucker, they would deem you closed-minded if you continued to find the arguments for your side more persuasive than the arguments for the other side. So I agree that it's very valuable in society, and in fact, I think one of the reasons that a lot of the violence is breaking out on campus, for example, is the inability of people to understand arguments against their own view.
Exactly, I agree with that.
Right? So you know, and there's been studies saying that they don't teach critical thinking and everything. So critical thinking, the ability to think about arguments against your view, is good. But then to be asked to evaluate those as persuasive and to say that if you don't think those arguments against your view are persuasive makes you closed-minded, I don't think that's valid.
Well,
I think
then how about this? I mean, no, I disagree with you, but I think you're making a smart point. But how about just the reality that we see every day? I don't notice Christian groups suing to shut down atheist groups because they don't. But I do see a lot of atheist groups.
I'm not saying, you know, that there are not militant atheists, right? There are militant atheists. I don't happen to be one of them, and we could talk about, you know, why atheists become militant. I think more in the United States than in Europe, which was the focus of this study.
Right.
Here in the United States, the atheists, I think, are rebelling, you know, against their parents, so to speak. I think they're more militant. But you know, in this particular study, they're saying that you are closed-minded if you, having taken a certain position and finding that the most persuasive position, then don't find persuasive the opposite view. Okay, and that doesn't seem fair. There's one other aspect of the study that I think
let me ask a question, though, a broader question, which is, if you're a sincere Christian, and most don't live up to this, but this is the ideal, you are commanded to love those who persecute you, not just those you disagree with, but people who are actually trying to hurt you. There is no such requirement, of course, in atheism. So who's a more open-minded person? The person who's actively seeking to love someone who hates them, or someone who's not?
Sure, but then the question is that sort of open-mindedness actually a value as well? I have actually two critiques of the study. One is that it defines closed-mindedness in such a way that atheists are going to automatically come out, I believe, as closed-minded. And it's because of the issue that we just, you know, talked about, this issue of having to come up with arguments against your view when you don't believe there's any evidence against your view. So there's that. And then the second issue is that it evaluates you according to your willingness to entertain contradictions, to integrate contradictions into your own thinking. And the refusal to integrate contradictions into your own thinking is part of the basic laws of logic. So, you know, on that standpoint, I would say, yes, atheists are probably more likely to follow the basic laws of logic. The preamble of this study said that atheists were more logical.
I don't believe that. I will say, I have to admit, you seem like a pretty logical atheist. But I still
I am. I've been a lifelong atheist.
Okay. I hope you switch, because it's depressing in the end. But thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Okay.
Linda Sarsour has insulted female genital mutilation and called on Muslims to never assimilate to American culture, and yet the Democratic Party lionizes her. She is a hero. She's the most reasonable. Now, more next. Plus, a new feature on tonight's show, News Quiz. We have the questions. Will our anchors, Peter Ducey and Elizabeth Pran, have the answer? Stay tuned for that. One of the big winners in this brave new political environment is Linda Sarsour. She's a left-wing activist. She's now the face of Muslim identity politics in America. Of course, the Democratic Party loves her. But what does she actually believe? Assess it for yourself.
Respect the presidency, but I will not respect this president.
Our number one and top priority is to protect and defend our communities. It is not to assimilate and to please any other people in authority. I hope that we, when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad, that we are struggling against tyrants and rulers, not only abroad in the Middle East or in the other side of the world, but here in these United States of America, where you have fascists and white supremacists and Islamophobes reigning in the White House.
Arguing against assimilation. Why can't Democrats find a Muslim mascot who is not a total extremist? They probably could if they tried. Eat Street's Joe Simonson joins us tonight for more on this Linda Sarsour person. Joe, thanks a lot for coming on. Who is she exactly, and is it fair to call her an extremist?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Linda Sarsour makes Muslims in the Middle East look moderate. She is an extremist in the fact that she believes in Sharia law. She recently used the word jihad to explain her personal inner war with the president. She is absolutely an extremist. She has taken a leadership position in the so-called leftist resistance to President Trump. And she's certainly outside the mainstream of, I think, and I would even say the average American Muslim's ideals.
Well, if she's for Sharia law, for sure, but that seems like it would set her at odds with mainstream feminism, which is, at least purports to be, about empowering women. Sharia law is, a non-Western code that really circumscribes their choices. So, how does that work? How are feminists for Sharia law?
Absolutely. I mean, leftist feminists definitely have a difficult balancing act to play here. I think they really like having a token minority, and when she starts speaking about what Sharia law is, they kind of just turn off their ears and we have Palestinian activists and it's so great, and well, just don't listen to what it actually means to live in a country that has Sharia law.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like most feminists would be adamantly against
terrifying.
that. Is it fair to say that she has ties to mainstream Democratic politicians, elected Democrats?
Absolutely. I mean, not a single mainstream Democratic politician has certainly denounced her. She was one of the people at the front of the so-called Women's March after Trump was inaugurated. She staged with several different Democratic politicians, and she's certainly been embraced by mainstream Democrats. This is not a fringe figure, even though her beliefs are certainly fringe.
Huh. Where is she on Israel?
Not a fan. She is a Palestinian absolutist. I would be surprised if she even believes Israel has a right to exist, Tucker.
So does nobody say anything about this in the Democratic Party? I mean, it used to be, and by used to be, I mean like 18 months ago, someone like this would get some pushback in the Democratic Party. Does she?
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone that would criticize someone like Linda Sarsour has been driven outside of the Democratic Party. I mean, I think this is reflected in the fact that Democrats have a really hard time losing elections. Now, what I don't understand, and it's what you mentioned earlier, is that there are millions of Muslim Americans in this country that are good people, Tucker, people who assimilated, people who go to school, have normal jobs, who don't preach Sharia law. And I don't understand why Democrats don't talk to one of these people to kind of talk about Islam.
You'd think.
You would.
Yeah, they've gotten extreme. Joe, thanks a lot for that. Thanks for the details. Appreciate it. Up next, are you smarter than a news reporter? That sounds like a rhetorical question and an obvious one. Of course you are. We'll find out in just minutes, though, for certain, our final exam. That's where Fox News' Peter Doocy and Elizabeth Pran get quizzed. This week's top news stories. Stay tuned. Time now for Final Exam. It's our weekly news quiz. Actually, tonight's the first time we're doing it. We're going to ask our contestants questions about this week's current events, torn from the headlines, and find out how much they really know. Joining us, our very first contestants. Save the tape from tonight. Fox News' Elizabeth Pran and Peter Doocy.
Bring it on.
I'm not taking my finger off.
Welcome to you both. This is something we thought of in the shower one morning, but we think it's going to work.
This is my nightmare. If I get one.
I think you're gonna do great. Here are the rules.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask the questions.
Okay.
The first one of you to buzz in on our specially made vehicle buzzers gets to answer that question. If you get it right, you get a point. If you get it wrong, you lose a point.
Okay.
Best of 5 wins. Are you ready?
5?
Best of 5.
Oh, okay.
Here's the first question. State officials in Nevada, sometimes called Nevada, this week announced a state of emergency when stores there sold out of what? Elizabeth?
Pot.
Marijuana. Weed. Okay, we're going to go to the tape and see if you're right.
Marijuana dispensaries are running out of pot. The governor has declared a state of emergency. A surge in sales there has left a lot of shelves empty.
Somebody watched a special report. I'm telling Brett Baer he's going to be flattered.
With that question?
It was good.
Interesting.
I'm not going to tell you what.
You and some chicanery behind the scenes?
I don't know. She said
that's illegal, so we're not going to top to that. Question 2.
Right.
This one is a multiple choice question, so wait for the choices before answering. The Olympic Committee this week announced that the city of Los Angeles would soon host the Summer Games. When was the last time LA hosted the Olympics? Was it 1980? Was it 1984? Was it 1988?
1984.
1984.
How do you know that?
It was before I was born, but I feel like I've seen a sweatshirt.
We're going to see if you're right. Let's go to the tape.
You're definitely right.
It was the LA Summer Games of '84 that electrified the country. The torch was lit at the LA Coliseum, but it was Carl Lewis who set the crowd on fire.
I'm impressed because 1984 to you was like the First World War to me. It was just like prehistory, but you knew it anyway.
I feel like I hear a lot about, was that the one that Bruce Jenner was in?
I'm not going there. Question 3. Last month, President Trump invited a recently retired quarterback to play golf with him. This week, that quarterback said that people pressured him not to accept the offer, but he felt like taking a pass on it would be, quote, un-American. Who is that?
Peyton Manning.
Peyton Manning, says Elizabeth Pran.
You know, I've had a chance to play with President Bush before. If President Obama or President Clinton asked me, I'd be there in a heartbeat. I mean, it was just the experience of playing with the office that was pretty cool to me, and I think it would have been almost un-American to have said no.
Only because of the ESPYs, that's why I knew.
I'm impressed, Elizabeth
Well,
Pran.
too, but that, I mean, I lowered the bar, but I'm good. I'm done. I'm tapping out. I'm going to go.
Peter, wake up, son. Question 4, another multiple choice question. This week, one of the largest icebergs ever recorded broke off from the Antarctic Peninsula. It was enormous. Scientists say it weighs 1 trillion tons and is the size of what state? Rhode Island, Maine, Delaware.
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 I think it's like one of my old Joe Biden Google alerts that I just get anything Delaware.
AKA the first state. Let's see on the tape.
A massive chunk of ice separating into the ocean, said to be the size of Delaware.
Peter Doozy, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't
wins the geography quiz. Okay, we're down to the final question. It's 2-2.
Okay.
A technician working at a Corpus Christi bank, that's in Texas, yesterday, had to be rescued by police after he accidentally locked himself inside what for 2 hours?
The ATM machine.
How did you know that?
I think it would be the vault, but we've got a tape.
We can hear a little voice coming from the machine. You'll never see this again in your life, that somebody's stuck in the ATM machine.
Unbelievable.
How did you know
Because that is the craziest story. People were going to the ATM and this man was inside sending them notes that just said, help, I'm stuck in the ATM.
The world's
Let me
smallest repairman.
How
He's
do
only
you
like
like
8
there
inches
wouldn't be
long.
What would you think if you
oxygen
got
in there?
that note? I would think that the thing was going to take my credit card and I would probably, skim it and I would just leave.
I would think it was an inside job.
I would think so.
Final exam, the first test, 3-2.
Oh.
And you know that breaks.
My
Peter,
heart is
congratulations.
broken.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So how'd you do? We can't hear you, unfortunately, but follow the news closely for next week. We've got another final exam coming up Friday. After this, Republicans have run basically everything in Washington for 7 months. What have been the results? We've got an update on that coming up. Well, it didn't get a ton of coverage, but last night the House of Representatives voted to continue funding sex changes and gender reassignment hormone treatments in the U.S. military. Now, you could debate whether that policy is going to help the military win more wars, and we've actually debated that on this show. But for now, what's more interesting is that the vote took place at all. The Congress member is controlled by Republicans. They've got the biggest majority they've had in years. The Senate's controlled by them, too. So is the White House, most governorships, and state legislatures. Republicans control a lot, and most of that happened in the last election when voters sent a pretty clear message about what they wanted. So what did those voters get in return? Well, last night they got a new form of left-wing social engineering so extreme that just 10 years ago it would have been unthinkable. No Democrat would have proposed it. Few even would have conceived of it. Yesterday, dozens of Republicans voted for it. Meanwhile, the country is still waiting on that border wall and the repeal of Obamacare and some form of tax relief. Refugees are still coming into the country in large numbers. The carried interest loophole is still in the tax code. The swamp is as wet as ever. What happened exactly? Was it a disorganized White House, a dishonest Republican leadership, obstructionist Democrats, partisan media, all of the above? Who knows? Probably. But it's amazing in any case, whatever the cause. Imagine the opposite for a second, a world in which Democrats had been swept to power in a shocking victory in November. But before doing anything their voters actually voted for them to do, they decided to, launch an investigation into the Clinton Foundation, pass a budget that shrunk the size of government, maybe reinstitute don't ask, don't tell in the military. That would be the greatest betrayal of a political base in American history, wouldn't it be? Exactly. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 to the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Don't forget to DVR it if you haven't already. Have a fantastic weekend. Our friends over at The 5 are ready to go live from New York. See you Monday.